We have to be embodied for us to be interested in taking care of the world. But we have to learn to love, to be able to learn to love the world, to be interested enough to make the sacrifices that it takes, just like having children requires us to make sacrifices. And it's the same dynamic. And the third thing is that we have to have the wisdom and the insight, capacity to see our own darkness as well as our own light, and other people's darkness as well as their light, without attacking us or them. So those are the three dynamics that we must develop in societies.
Welcome to the podcast The Embodiment Talks, a podcast by the Embodiment Lab with Marianne van. Taking your role as change agent of societal or education systems requires vision and courage. This podcast will help you take this pioneer's role with more body awareness and confidence, without losing sight of the connection with others. We dive into how we as humans are hardwired, how systems change works, and how both are related. I will take you on my own quest, and I will share background information, talk to experts, and share exercises. We will think, feel, and act. Great that you're here, and happy listening. Okay, welcome again at this podcast, The Embodiment Talks. And today I'm in a conversation with Marianne Bentzen. And Marianne is a psychotherapist already since the 80s, I think. So for a long time. And since the mid-90s, you've been working together with Susan Hart a lot on the development and the implementation of the neuro-affective development psychology. And you've written many articles about this and a few books as well, which some are maybe really nice to show, because I like the Neuroeffective picture book and how you've been able to make such difficult and complex material very, I can't say it's simple, but to make it very accessible to a broader audience. So I'd like to show this. And there is a second part. So this is about the first, I think, up to puberty in the development. And then the second part, which is this one, and you already see from the front as well, like the nice pictures, and the whole book is with those kind of nice pictures, which is actually the development after that, from the teenage till like the early 20s. And so that's kind of where you explain your whole theory. And recently you also wrote a book, The Neuroeffective Meditation. So we probably put the links down in the show notes with the podcast. And I'm really intrigued by your theory. And so I'm very grateful that you want to dedicate your time here today to talk about it in the Embodiment Talks and to inspire pioneers, change agents of societal change, and how this theory can actually be very useful for them to know a little bit more about. And as I also said in the introductory talk, I'd like to explore deeper into how that neuroeffective development can be useful in societal change, since there's so many global dynamics going on, and how we are trapped in systems that do not work for us as humans anymore. And probably you recognize that in Denmark as well, but in the Netherlands, we do have quite a few crises on environment, social, and also mental crisis with many people. So, so thank you for being here. And maybe, is there anything you want to add to this introduction, or is it kind of a complete picture that I made from you, or did I miss out of anything?
Just maybe a brief comment about the picture books. The first one was an overview, in a certain sense, an overview of everything that I thought was essential. And the main part of that actually happens in the first 2 or 3 years. And the second book takes the second wave of development. We develop in 3 waves through our lives. And the second wave of development starts around the age of 2, or you could say 1, but 2 is probably more appropriate, and then goes up to about 20. And we're actually writing the third picture book right now, which starts at 20 and goes until death. Okay. So that's the third wave of development. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking forward to that as well. And it's going to be that nice with all the pictures and so on.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Style.
Yeah. Great. But can you explain a little bit more about the neuro-affective developmental psychology, just to kind of sketch a baseline from which we are talking today?
Yeah, what happened was that in the early 90s, two things occurred. One thing was that the 90s had been declared the decade of the brain. So there was a lot of brain research that was running in the 90s. The other thing that happened was that I went to the United States because we had, in the institute we had a training over there, and I was one of the primary trainers of this training. And I met Paul MacLean's triune brain theory, and it clicked in me because I had been wondering for a while, how do we describe the parts of us that mature, but for instance, never develop words? How do we understand that as adult? How do we get that? And the triune brain worked really well for that. And when I came home and started talking about this, it turned out that there was one person who really took fire with it, and that was my colleague Susan Hart. And she came out of a history of having worked with psychotic infants, which is, it's hard to be a psychotic infant. Things have to really go wrong for you to be a psychotic infant, but that was what she had been working with. And what we found together was how development matures through these stages, of which the first one is primarily sensory and has to do with synchronizing with other people. And the second one, which starts at 3 months or 2 months even, and goes up to about 1.5 years, is emotional and has to do with establishing love relationships and attachment relationships. And after that, we get a symbolic understanding. And the symbolic understanding is actually prefrontal or thought-oriented. And that creates the capacity to separate from emotions and to separate from sensations and to look at them from a different position. And that ability is what develops into also really maturing language and creating a story about ourselves, and therefore also a sense of who we are, what identity we have. And all of this can be basically documented and tracked in terms of brain development during those years. So those are the years, actually right now I'm talking about the first level of development is really early. It goes from in utero and up to about 2-3 months. And the second wave, or the second aspect, is the emotional one, starting around 2 months and going up to about 1.5 years. And then that's stable. And then at the third level, we're talking about the prefrontal, the thought processes. And that one starts around 1.5 years, 1 year, 1.5 years, and goes all the way up to in our early 20s, or actually our late 20s, which is when the prefrontal cortex is mature. So that's a huge developmental step, the last one. And that's what fascinated us, because if you look at different forms of psychotherapy, you can see that some people are working primarily at the first level, and some people are working primarily at the second emotional level, and most people are working with the narratives, because they think that if you change the narratives, the rest changes too. It just doesn't. So that's why we've spent the last, I guess, 30 years unpacking how to work with all these levels and how to be able to see what is functional, how you can work with these levels. So that's the overview. Mm-hmm. Brain, psychological development, maturity are the 3 code words.
Yeah, and you actually say that certain parts of that development need to be stabilized before you can develop the next one. So can you explain a little bit more about that as well?
Well, it's kind of like if to take an image, if you have a bush, then you're not going to get flowers if the branches aren't working. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to first develop a main stem, and then you have to develop branches out from the main stem, and you have to develop leaves, and then you can start to get flowers, and then you can get fruit. And that's kind of how the brain functions too. If you can't develop the ability to synchronize with other people, then and get excited with them, so have the same arousal levels happening, and if you can't develop the ability to be excited about certain things and want to know more about them and pull away from other things, if you can't stabilize that, then there's no way that you can stabilize being happy with somebody, or being sad about somebody, or being upset with somebody, angry with somebody, or developing a mature relationship, so developing attachment with someone. And if you can't develop that, we know that attachment is correlated with mentalization, so you won't ever learn to be able to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it, or why other people are doing what they're doing, because that depends on your capacity for attachment, and attachment depends on your capacity to synchronize. So
Mm-hmm. But I recently I've joined a workshop from you here in the Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you said that really struck me is that we kind of strive for self-love. I don't know whether you remember that you actually shared something about this, but, and that you said, and it also comes back to these kind of how it builds up and how we develop. You can't self-love if somebody doesn't teach you that you are to be loved. And that actually comes from like the earlier parts of your childhood where you're cared after by your parents or your caretakers, and they kind of teach you that you are to be loved, and only when you have experienced that, then you can make a next step towards self-love.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's maybe also an example on how it kind of builds us on each other, and how it that resonates with people as well. Because I often hear people say that they need to kind of do it all themselves. So we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to love ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yet it seems to be so so difficult.
Yeah. We're starting in the wrong place. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
It becomes this moral statement, you know, well, you should love yourself. You need to love yourself more. Or the people that have somehow, some of them, I guess, can love themselves, but people that can love themselves generally don't talk about it. I don't know why that is, but that seems to be the case. Whereas people that aren't really very good at that, they're like, I can love myself, you know, and it's like, no, but you can imagine that you're loving yourself. You think that that's what it is to be in a kind of self, you're cheating yourself. You cheat yourself into this state where you think that everything's going to be okay, or everything is okay, but it's really not. And people around you can sense that. Sometimes people around you will see you saying, well, I really love myself. And people around you are kind of going, yeah, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that feeling? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I know that. Yeah. And I don't always find it easy to love myself. And sometimes it's nice when others tell you, like, oh, you are nice, you know, and you want to be loved. And I think, oh yeah. I forgot about that, but thank you. And it's, I think, just how it goes. Yeah.
I don't know that I can love myself. I don't know that it's not something that I'm particularly interested in, but I am interested in caring. So there's that sense of, I think for me, it's not a question of loving myself. I've always thought that was kind of an odd term, but what I do believe in is the capacity to be unified. So a sense of being whole, or developing a sense of wholeness in my actions and my feelings, so that I can say what I think is essential, and that what I think is essential has an impact in the world, and that I protect my capacity to do that. I protect my ability to be unified, to be at one with what I'm doing or saying. So I think that makes more sense in my feeling of the world. So
yeah, it's a kind of an alignment with what you resonate and what you say and what you do. And it's something that I could feel really in your work as well, in that workshop, that you really embody. For me, that's like the embodiment talks, but it's like what embodiment is about as well. Can I truly embody everything that I do and think? And
if I can't, why am I doing it? You know?
Yeah.
But of course, sometimes you have to practice. You can't always embody everything. Sometimes you have to practice before you can embody something. Yeah, which is another story.
And then you embody it and you lose it again somewhere, and then you have to gain it back. And what rest? Sorry.
Sometimes you outgrow it.
Yeah, that could be as well.
Really important 10 years ago, but now it's not. You know.
Yeah. What resonates in what the last thing that you said was about the caring, and somehow what I sense when I look outside as well, when I look in society, is how difficult it appears to be for us to care, and to care for ourselves, to care for others, and to care for the environment or nature or whatever we've created. Can you say a little bit more about that, based on your model? Kind of where did we kind of lose track?
I think there are three parts to the model. The first one is embodiment. The second one is being able to love, and the third one is being able to mentalize, to be able to understand and feel what's happening in yourself and in others. So there are those three pieces. And I think what happens is that we get distracted all the time into something else. Are we beautiful enough? Are we smart enough? Are we in the right job? Are we going to the right vacation spots? Are we driving in a train instead of taking a flight? You know, there are all these different aspects that we get constantly distracted by. We get distracted by news. The first thing that we need to, I think, grasp in terms of society, which was one of the places you want to go, I think we have to learn two things. And one thing that we have to learn is to love what we want to take care of, because we take care of things that we love. So if we can't love the world, I don't think we can take care of it. Love does not have a due date. It doesn't stop again. It goes on. And that's why if we want something to go on, our feelings for something and our actions on something, we have to love it. We have to find a way to love it. I think that's essential.
And how can we do that? Can you give some practical tools or ideas?
It's part of what I do in meditation, is to find ways to discover how the world is taking care of us, with oxygen, with gravity, with sunshine, with plants, with food, and it's not a thought process. Thinking about it doesn't help. You can't think your way into falling in love with the world or with a person. You can only open your eyes and discover that your heart is falling in love. So there's that discovery process. So for instance, in October, I'll be doing a workshop about that in Corfu, where we'll be exploring this quality of belonging, which really belongs to the somatic part, but it's also something that we have been distracted away from. We don't feel that we belong. Most people don't feel that they belong anywhere anymore, but they do. They belong to the earth, and it's possible to come to know that again. And when you belong, that also opens this sense of love, and love will let you remember to take care.
Yeah, and already in the question, like, where do I belong? So already that separation from actually the place where we do belong on in the societies where we're part of, the earth that we're part of. Yeah. And is that sense of belonging, is that part of that first stage that you spoke about before, like the more embodiment part, or is that then more the part of being able to love?
Belonging starts before love, in fact.
Yeah.
Belonging starts when we get created, really, but it certainly also is very intensely active in the 6 months from in utero to about 2 or 3 months, where we're working with synchronizing. It's the synchronization. When somebody is walking in the same pace with you, there's a sense of belonging that starts to just open up. When people play music together, when people sing together, when soldiers march together, there's a sense of belonging that is created. Synchronization creates belonging.
Yeah, so also there you see the how it kind of builds up. So we first have to get to regain that sense of belonging to society and to the planet, and before we can start loving it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Before we can start taking care of it.
And that's what's required for us to continue to take care of it. I mean, we can take care of it short term. You can decide that I will now go out and I will pick up all the plastic on the beach, for instance. That's a fine thing to do, but you probably won't be passionate about doing that every day, But if you have a sense of loving the ocean and loving the beaches, then there will be a natural movement towards doing that every day or as often as possible or wherever you are. My husband, for instance, always has, we have a dog, and so it's easy to have little plastic bags with you, and he'll pick up stuff as he goes along. And I know people that do that. Wherever they're walking, they have a plastic bag so they can pick up, even though plastic is bad, but still, they can pick up things that shouldn't be there in nature. And that's a sense of that love, that it just wants to do that. It just wants to.
Yeah. There come 2 questions in my mind, and then I think, like, which one is the best to ask first? But I just like to say a little bit about the mentalization part as like the third part, being able to mentalize. And I think it's often confused by concepts and ideas of, okay, what could the world look like? How do we envision like that new world, which is also a mental process because it's theories, it's concepts. But I think how you view mentalization is something else. And so can you elaborate on the difference and why mentalization is important to actually be able to implement those kind of conceptual ideas?
Well, it has to do with why are we all fighting each other, right? So it relates to this thing about making a better world. You were mentioning some of the things that would make the world better. Well, we need more space to unpack our creative selves and care for each other. And that's nice, except we don't care for each other because we have status as an instinct, more or less, as a very deep biological system. And that means that we're always fighting to see who's going to be on top. So what happens with mentalization is that we become able to notice that we're doing something, or that somebody else is doing something, which can be useful or not useful, but we don't have to act on it because we can sense it and we can feel it and we can relate to it. So there's a sense of caring with that comes much more naturally. It's just that it takes a lot of development to do that. And it's not a simple thing. It's not something that you can just do it. It takes time. It's some of the dynamics that go into developing wisdom. So the ability to know your feelings, to feel your feelings, including the nasty feelings, to feel them and to recognize them and to not act them. and to recognize the nasty and the beautiful feelings in other people and to not act on them either, and to be able to try to reach people in a different way still. And that's part of when the people that are studying wisdom are actually describing some of those same processes, the ability to know that the world is an uncertain place and that nothing that we ever decide is necessarily the right decision, because we can make mistakes, and that there are no finished ways to just do something or just learn something, or you can't just push these 3 buttons and then you can mentalize. It's just, that's not how the world is. It's not how development works either. But what you can do is to continue to first develop the capacity to love, to feel safe in the world. And when you feel more safe in the world, you can start to use that to think about, what am I doing that participates in creating a bad outcome? What are other people doing that participates in creating a bad outcome? And when are we actually creating a good outcome? A friend of mine said it once. She said she was working with school children. She said that when they were being impossible, which they were some of the time, she would ask them, are you right now raising the energy in this room, or are you lowering it? And they would kind of go. And then they would come up with a true statement. They would say, I'm lowering it. And she was like, so what do you want to do now? And they would be attentive after that. So there's this discovery of oneself as a person who is supporting a certain movement in society or in the world that goes with mentalizing, with mentalization.
That's interesting, because if we look at the system, we're all part of the systems. We sometimes say like, oh, they have created this, and maybe some laws have been made around it, but we're all part of kind of the development in the society that we kind of live in. So, and that sense of belonging will probably also give us more of a sense that we are part of all that we've created. And that we then also are part of caring for it, and maybe creating something that is more humanized, that suits us as humans better than how it has become now. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And does the concepts of grow up, wake up, and clean up fit in that as well? Because that really resonated with me as well when I read your book.
Yeah, that would be grow up. Actually, everything that we've talked about so far has to do with growing up.
Okay. And what then because that is also like a certain sequence. We first grow up, then we wake up, and then we clean up.
Yeah.
So how would the next phases of like wake up and clean up then follow onto this?
I think clean up would come before wake up.
Okay. But in this case, probably, yeah.
But cleaning up would have to do with starting to be congruent with your adulthood. So if you've grown up, you actually know when you're part of creating a problem in your marriage or in your relationship or with your children. You're not just looking at, saying, well, my child does this, that, and the other thing. You're looking at, how do I create the way that my child is behaving? What is it that I'm doing that is making my child do this? So you start to look at a much more fluid state of, there's me and there's my child, and both of us are doing something, right? So that's one aspect of cleaning up, is to start to see that, which is also mentalizing, and then to do something else about it, to say, okay, I'm going to talk to my child or my husband or my wife about that I'm doing something here and you're doing something here too. And that conversation can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. So in a way, it's like doing dishes. You're never finished with the dishes. You're only finished with the dishes until next meal. And that's kind of how it is to clean up. You're never finished with Ken Wilber talks about it as exercising, among other things. He talks about it as emotional work with other people also. So it's these processes of continuing to clear your relationships. And then you discover that with some people, that's really easy. With some people, it's very hard, partly because they haven't learned to do that. So they don't know how to do that. And they are stuck in a different way of working. They're stuck in a way of working where they want to perhaps be on top, or they want you to understand that they didn't do anything wrong, or all of which is understandable, but it doesn't help us to come farther. So that would be the cleaning up dynamics. And finally, there's the waking up dynamics, which is all about discovering the spiritual dimensions. And they get, sometimes they get flattened. They get kind of very, in a way, romantically treated. You can watch a movie or read a romance book, and you get these kind of images of the beautiful man and the beautiful woman that nobody recognizes, and the beautiful man recognizes the beautiful woman, and they can't figure each other out, so they're having a fight all the time. And then suddenly they discover that they're each other's soulmates and true love, and then they get married, and then the book ends. So that's kind of we can have that same relationship to spirituality, or we can have that same relationship to the planet, that there's Gaia, and Gaia knows where we're going and what we're doing, and Gaia is our mother. And we can have the same romantic relationship to that, but we can also have a much more mature relationship to it. We can have a sense of the information that we have about what's happening with our Earth. We can have information about what's happening with our societies, and how our societies are struggling. And we can still know that we belong there with the light and with the darkness, in both of those. And the waking up has to do with discovering how we belong to something that's larger than anything that we have ever met or understand. So yeah.
I noticed that I find it a little bit difficult to see a certain sequence in waking up and cleaning up, is how you explain it now, because I think if we indeed tap into the fact that we are part of a larger whole, we do need that as well to be able to clean up and to be able to care for what we spoke about before. But we can't fully open up to that before we start cleaning up. So I could say that it kind of could go parallel or together, because we need a certain wake up before we actually can start cleaning up. But we can't wait for a full wake up before we start cleaning up, if we look at our societies and our environment and so on.
I think they all collapse into each other.
Yeah.
If you don't grow up, you can't clean up or wake up. If you can't clean up, you can't wake up, and maybe you can't grow up. I would suspect you can't grow up either. I mean, if you're leaving messes everywhere, how grown up are you? That's what 2-year-olds do. So they go together. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same if we tune in just something external to and call that spirituality, then we can also debate like how grown up are you if it's not really embodied. It's something externalized.
Yeah.
And the same for pioneers that think that they have the answers to the problems that we have. Then also that is the kind of, we used to have to grow up as to see more the systemic dynamics of what you're working with. Yeah. So they're all intertwined somehow to come to full development, I think.
It's a messy world, and the world is, different. It keeps surprising us.
Yeah.
And that's part of where the wisdom dynamic comes in, or the mentalization dynamic, to know that I don't know what's going to happen next, and neither does anybody else. And there is no 10-step do this sort of system that will work for everybody. There's a sense of what is our next step. In Holland, one of the next steps obviously is to build better dikes, for instance, or in not too long there won't be much of a country left. So there are places that need better protection against the ocean, but that doesn't help us with the earth, with the ground, etc., etc.
Yeah, complexity.
Yeah.
Great, beautiful. But I think it really gives a nice view on and an additional view on how development also feeds into coming to change in society, and that we can't see it separate. So we now have people working on societal dynamics and people working on personal or development dynamics, and they kind of need to come together. And so I think it was really nice to hear you talk about this as well, and how they kind of do come together in this conversation. So thank you for this wisdom on this matter. But is there anything that was left out that you feel like I really need to say this before we can come to a closure?
No, I think that I think that the core of what I have to say is really the core of what came to me when you started talking about it, which is that we have to be embodied for us to be interested in taking care of the world. But we have to learn to love, to be able to learn to love the world, to be interested enough to make the sacrifices that it takes, just like having children requires us to make sacrifices. And it's the same dynamic. And the third thing is that we have to have the wisdom and the insight capacity to see our own darkness as well as our own light, and other people's darkness as well as their light, without attacking us or them. So those are the three dynamics that we must develop in societies. And how does one do that? One does that through ordinary, mature process. I mean, it's and there will be wounds in it. There always were wounds in it, and there always will be wounds in it. And that's important, because it's one of the ways that we develop wisdom, or that we develop mentalization, strong capacity to see what's happening in other people, to see what's happening in ourselves, comes out of wounding. So wounding is central to our lives as one of the riches, not as something terrible that we have to heal, but as one of the riches, that we understand what pain is. It's an important thing to understand. Yeah, not the only important thing, but one.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for this addition as well. And for people listening to this episode, if you're really interested in the work of Marianne Bentzen, I will put the link to her work in the show notes. But I also like to mention that you are giving a training, or that's starting. It's 3 blocks of 4 days, which is starting in November. So in the Netherlands, but it's spoken in English, so it's accessible for an international audience. And I will also put the link to this training in the show notes below, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be very enriching for many people.
For the grow up.
Sorry, to grow up.
Grow up purpose,
yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. And I've also asked you to record an exercise that you can find in the next episode. So if you want to experience some of Marianne's work, then go to the next episode where you'll find an exercise. So thank you, Marianne, for today's conversation and your wisdom.
Lovely talk. Thank you.
Great that you listened to this episode of the Embodiment Talks. Please let me know your thoughts about this episode or the insights that you gained. Email me to the address in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with me, or if you have a question or topic that you want to know more about, don't hesitate to send me an email as well. Do you want to be kept up to date? Like this podcast in your favorite podcast app. You can help me by giving a thumbs up or leaving a comment so that this podcast will reach more people. You can find more information about my work on my website www.embodimentlab.nl or my YouTube channel Embodiment Lab. Thanks for listening, and meet you at the next episode.